When I was 16, I was in a very serious horseback riding accident and I died. I left my body, found myself 30, 40 feet up in the air looking down. I knew I was dead and I saw a man up there with me and he was smiling at me and I recognized him instantly. It was Jesus. I shouldn't have seen Jesus. I'm Jewish. I had always been told he was a hoax. He said, "You didn't die. You have to go back." And I said, "No, I'm not going back."
Hey everyone, welcome back to God's Voice. Today I'm Vladimir Proknevsky, and this is the podcast where we share real stories of the supernatural that prove just how real and powerful God is. Today's guest, Heidi Bar, grew up in a Jewish home where the name of Jesus was never spoken except as a curse word. But everything changed when a tragic accident took her life at 16, and she found herself face to face with the very person she was told didn't exist. What she saw in heaven and the love she encountered left no doubt. Jesus is real. Now let's dive in. Heidi, welcome to God's Voice today. So excited to have you on the show. Before we jump in talking about your near-death experience, can you get up and paint a picture of what your life was like leading up to that encounter?
I grew up in Iowa, small city, in a kind of semi-rural area. And it was glorious and it was terrible at the same time. The glorious part was I always loved nature. I could pick raspberries. I could pick morel mushrooms. I spent time roaming through the woods. Our yard was adjacent to a big stretch of woodland. So I had all kinds of freedom to spend time outdoors in nature. I went horseback riding. I was biking. I was swimming. I was boating. I was water skiing. There were some really wonderful things. And I loved growing up in Iowa. I loved the cornfields. I loved the fields of soybean. I loved the deer tracks in the snow. I loved everything about growing up in Iowa. But at the same time, my family was pretty dysfunctional. My mom tended towards pretty severe depression. My father had a lot of issues with anxiety. They both kind of shared that. And there was if there was a combination of variety of abuses that occurred. And my parents are no longer alive. I do respect and honor them. So I don't really get, in the book, I get into some of it. I don't get into everything. But I grew up with this weird dichotomy where I thought I knew things weren't right. And when I saw my life in comparison to other people's lives, I thought there's something wrong with my life. Never knew if I was coming or going. Many things in my life were very controlled. I ended up, in my early teenage years, suffering from pretty significant abuse. And from the age of 12 on, I ended up with an eating disorder. Very severe eating disorder. In fact, by the time I went to Israel when I was 17, I weighed 86 pounds and I'm a little over 5'6". So that was bad. And I got into drugs. I basically cut off all my long-term friends, hung out with druggies, and I got into drugs because I was looking for a solution. Now, one of the unique things about my experience is my parents were atheists. My father he claimed to be an atheist, but at the same time, he was very terrified of death. And if you're truly an atheist, death shouldn't frighten you because it's just lights out. So it shouldn't scare. I mean, yes, of course, there's some anxiety and anticipation, but it's just lights out. But what my father was afraid of his entire life was eternal darkness, conscious of the eternal darkness, all alone in the eternal darkness, which is, in my mind, exile from God. And that's what he feared. My mother was, at best, an agnostic. She just simply never discussed God. And whatever my father said, that's what she did and reflected. But from the time I was a little kid, I always believed in God. And my parents used to make fun of me because I prayed. I believed in the God of Israel. I'm Jewish. I was raised Jewish in an Orthodox community. And I always believed in God. I looked out of my bedroom window at night and saw the stars. And I thought, this is not possible. Everything I see in this world is not possible without God, without the God of Abraham. It doesn't make sense. There's no purpose for existence if there isn't a God. So I always had that belief in God. And that contrasted with my parents' criticism, and they simply couldn't understand why I would believe in God. For example, as a Jew, we normally don't discuss much of Jesus. But my father had sort of a mantra: Jesus Christ is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. And we were not allowed to mention his name unless it was in the form of a cuss word. We simply were not allowed to mention his name. We lived in a community that was predominantly Christian, and yet he had disdain for Christians and actually for religious Jews, because he felt anyone who was religious, anyone who needed religion, was weak and needed a crutch. My dad didn't need a crutch. He actually needed a crutch, but he said he needed a crutch worse than anyone I know. He needed someone to rely on more than anyone I knew at that time. But he had nothing but disdain for anyone who had a belief in God. So it was kind of difficult because as I said, we lived in a predominantly Christian community. Everyone at my school was Christian. All our neighbors, almost all of our neighbors were Christian. Some were Jewish. We did have this kind of for many years, we had a cohesive Orthodox Jewish community, which fell apart when I was 12 years. By the time I was 13, it fell apart for reasons which I do explain in the book I wrote, What I Saw in Heaven. And there were a variety of reasons it fell apart, one of which was the pedophile rabbi, which is atypical. He was a new rabbi who had been hired a year before my bat mitzvah. But from the age of 12 to 16, I was in a very dark place. And one awful thing happened after another. From the time I was a very small child, I had talked to God every night, always talked to God. And I always felt he was there listening to me. He was my surrogate father, I guess. I always felt he was there. I could tell him anything. I could tell him about my day. I could tell him about any injustice that had been done. I could tell him what I was worried about. I could tell him everything. When I experienced what I experienced between the ages of 12 and 13, I stopped talking to God. And it's not because I was angry with God. It's because I felt I didn't deserve to talk to God. In my world, if something bad happened to you, it was your fault. So I took anything bad that happened to me, I took that responsibility upon myself. I had obviously done something to cause something bad to happen to me. So I blamed myself for pretty much everything. I also took responsibility for my parents and for my sister. I was like the parent. I was the oldest of 3 girls. So I became the parent to pretty much everyone in the family because my parents weren't always functioning as parents. In fact, very rarely did they function as parents. But there were good things too. Like we learned to ski. There were just some really fun things that sometimes things were very fun. Sometimes things were not. I just never knew what to expect. And I had a horse. My father took a horse in trade. He did some legal work for a local rancher and he gave me a horse. And I boarded the horse at his stables. So I had always loved horses. I'd been riding since I was probably 5 years old, and I'd gone to horseback riding camp since I was 8. So I loved having a horse. She was my one true constant and friend. When I was 16, I was in a very serious horseback riding accident, and I died. I had taken my horse out by myself, which was not unusual. I oftentimes rode with a friend, but she was sick that day. So, and I'd driven the car. I'd gotten my license just a few weeks before. Took my sisters with me and we went out to the ranch. Took my horse out on the trails. Charlie had about, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 acres up in the Iowa hills. And It was a good ride. It was the end of April, beginning of May. Beautiful day, not too hot, not too cold. There were some big fluffy clouds in the sky. There wasn't a lot of wind. It was a good day. I wasn't expecting anything other than a horseback ride. And when I had brought my horse in from the paddock where she was kept, a man and his wife were in the barn arguing. She owned an Arabian that was very ill-behaved. And I had only seen her riding the Arabian, and even then I tended to avoid her because the Arabian was so poorly behaved. If you tried to walk past the Arabian stall, it would bite at you and kick at you. I didn't like the horse. But that day, her husband was with her, and he wanted to ride the horse, and they were arguing about it. So I thought, okay, not my business. I got on my horse, and I always rode bareback. I couldn't afford a saddle, so I always rode bareback, which was okay with me. I preferred riding bareback.
Before we get back to this episode, if you're enjoying this interview, can you take a second and subscribe? It really helps us reach more people with these powerful stories. Thank you in advance. And now let's get back to the interview.
And as I returned back to the barn, I'd been out for about an hour. I stopped above the barn to just enjoy the day. I was sitting on the back of my horse. I had a good view. I was on a narrow trail in a corner. I didn't have anywhere else to go. The only way I could get back to the barn was to turn my horse around, go back the trail, and then to the barn. Go back down the trail and then to the barn. And I heard hoofbeats. And I knew immediately that this was the Arabian, that the man had taken her out and he was out of control. Because when you're at a stable, you don't run your horse back to the barn. That's just a big no-no. So as I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? If I thought, okay, I'll sit here. She will turn on the trail to the barn and run the Arabian. She'll run directly to the barn. But she didn't. She came right at me. And I thought about getting off of my horse, but then I thought I'm probably going to be trampled. That was a real possibility. So I thought, okay, if I stay on my horse, she's going to stop. She didn't stop. And my horse began to get really nervous and dance around, and I was trying to keep her calm. And this horse ran right up to us, barely clipped us. And then she managed to flip around and head back to the barn. I could see the man when the man had dropped his reins, and he was just holding on to the saddle horn for dear life. And I remember thinking as she was approaching me, if she steps on those reins, his horse is going to flip and they could both get badly hurt. But when she clipped my horse or just kind of brushed right past my horse reared up. And I dropped my reins and grabbed her mane and held on. She came back down. Second time she reared up, she stepped with her back feet stepped off the trail, and it was a slope. And she flipped over backwards onto me, falling across my body, crushing me. And I saw her body coming. When she hit my chest, I died. It stopped my heart. And I left my body, found myself 30, 40 feet up in the air looking down. I knew I was dead. There was no question in my mind. I knew that was my body. I knew I was dead. And I was watching everything happen, and I had two thoughts. Number one, I was hoping my horse wasn't injured, and I saw that she got up and ran down towards the barn after that other horse. The second thought was that my sisters were there, my younger sisters, and they were both watching this. And I saw my little sister scream and cover her face with her hands, and I saw my other sister who was sitting in the car press her face against the car window. And I said aloud, at least as far as I could tell it was aloud, I wish my sisters didn't have to see me die. And when I said those words, I suddenly noticed that there was a light flowing over my right shoulder. It was a golden light. It was almost like water flowing over my right shoulder. I knew it wasn't the sun. The sun would have been up there and there were clouds. This was directly over my right shoulder. So I turned around and I saw a man up there with me. And he was smiling at me, and I recognized him instantly. And it was Jesus. I shouldn't have seen Jesus. I'm Jewish. I had always been told he was a hoax. I had not read the New Testament. I'd once glanced at a verse, the opening verses of Matthew. That was it. And I hadn't even read all of my Hebrew scriptures. But I saw him there and I recognized him instantly, and he moved forward until we were right next to each other. And I said, "Hi, I know you." And he was grinning from ear to ear. This was like an amazing reunion. I was so happy to see him. He was so filled with joy, so happy to see me. And I knew I'd known him my entire life. There was no like, "Oh, who are you?" Or believe me, I knew exactly who this was. There was no question in my mind. It was total truth. So we began talking, and as he was there with me, I knew a lot of things were happening below me, but I stopped paying any attention. I didn't care anymore. I only cared about Jesus. And as we were above my body, he offered me a life review. He wasn't condemning me as I watched my life. He was supporting me as I watched my life. I was condemning myself. If I did something kind, I felt that kindness as though I was the recipient of the kindness. If I did something cruel, I felt that. I felt what the other person felt. I felt it in my heart, what that person felt. And as I'm up there with Jesus, I realized I was disappointing him. I didn't want to do that again. I didn't want to ever. It doesn't mean I'm perfect. Once in a while, my mouth will run away with me. I didn't want to do that again. I didn't want to hurt people, because that was his primary focus, is how do you love God? How do you love me? And how do you love my creation? How do you treat my creation? Those were his two questions for me. And I knew I wanted to be what he wanted me to be. And after the life review, we left the scene of my death. He took my hand, and the only way I can describe this, because it's really hard to describe what we did. It was almost like flying, but it wasn't flying. We surfed. We body surfed on a wave of light, and it was underneath our feet. It was rolling underneath our feet, all colors. You cannot even imagine all the colors in that wave of light. It was like a wave of water, but it was light. We body surfed on this wave of light. We went basically through the universe. I saw a lot of stuff. And mostly what I saw because I was looking at Jesus' face, so anything we passed behind his face I could see. My focus was on him. I saw all the beauty. But of all the beauty of the universe, he was the most beautiful. I didn't want to look away from his face. And as we're surfing, he said, "This is so cool." And I said, "Yeah, this is so cool." It was the most fun thing I had ever done in my life. So we're surfing and we're going faster and faster and faster. And we came to a point where, and I saw individual things as we're surfing. We came to a point where there was no more individuation. I didn't see individual things. I saw one thing, and I realized that was God, that everything was a part of God, that there was no place in this universe where there is not God, and in our created universe. So as I realized that, we approached a threshold. It's not really a threshold. There aren't terms in human language to explain what I saw, but we approached almost like a doorway, and we went through that doorway. When we went through that doorway, and Jesus is still holding my hand, I saw a light. It was a white, blemishless light. It was perfect. It was alive, and it was love. And I knew that was God, the Father. Jesus took me directly into the light. And at that point, Jesus and the light were one thing, but still separate, but still one thing. It made perfect sense to me when I was dead. It's harder to describe when I'm alive. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting on God's lap. Now, how God can have a lap, I don't know. Light can have a lap. I was sitting on God's lap like a little toddler. He's a big God, kicking my legs. I had my face buried in his chest. I had my arms around him. He had his arms around me. And it was perfect love. It was acceptance. It was forgiveness. It was comfort. It was all the love in the universe in this one being who not only was sitting so that I could sit on his lap, but extended infinitely in all directions. So if the way I have to explain it is picture a man with a robe of light. I tried to see his face. I couldn't see his face. It was like shrouded or clouded or something. But a man wearing an infinite robe of light. It extends in all directions. It takes up all space and time. And that's what I experienced. As I was sitting there, I realized God wanted to show me something. In order to show me what he wanted to show me, he had to withdraw a portion of his light. And this was infinitely far away. This was super far away. I was really nearsighted in real life. My vision was like 2600 in both eyes. So I wore really thick glasses from that second grade. I was really nearsighted. But here I'm looking at something that he's showing me infinitely far away. And I can see every detail as if it's right here. The first thing I saw was grass. The grass is the thing that sticks with me every single day of my life. The grass was perfect. I could see every single blade of grass in this infinite sized meadow. It was green, like we have green grass here, but it was true green. All the colors in heaven are true colors. Colors here, even on the most beautiful day, are a reflection of the colors in heaven. They're a part of that, but it's not the same because the colors in heaven are living colors. The grass was alive. And I looked a little farther. I saw flowers, all different kinds of flowers, but my eyes kept coming back to some flowers that resembled irises. They were this very deep purple blue, and I could see every vein in the petals. I could see every grain of pollen. I could see every part of the flower. I looked a little farther and I saw massive groves of trees. These were huge trees, and they were, it's kind of like a grove of aspens because I could see every leaf on every tree. I could see every vein on every leaf on every tree. This is infinitely far away, and this is an infinite sized grove of trees, and I could see every vein on every leaf on every tree. And I realized the leaves were quaking, and I realized the flowers were moving because the grass was singing. The grass was singing the praises of God, and everything I saw was swaying to the song of the grass and singing the praise of God. I looked a little farther and I saw this path open up through the meadow, and I followed it. It kind of wound its way through the meadow. I saw people coming, and they were singing the same song as the grass. They were singing the praises of God. And as I'm looking at this, and there was a veil between us. I couldn't make out their faces. I just knew they were coming. I could hear their voices. Suddenly, Jesus was there again. And he said, "You didn't die. You have to go back." And I knew he meant, I tell people, I wasn't dead enough. I wasn't dead. I was dead, but I wasn't permanently dead. So I said, "No, I'm not going back." And I buried my face back in God's chest and closed my eyes. I was not going back. So Jesus took my hand and he said, "You didn't die. You have to go back." And I said, "No, I'm not going back." He pulled me off God's lap, and we're standing there. What you stand on in heaven, I don't know. we're standing there facing each other. He said, "You didn't die. You have to go back." And his voice was very firm. He was very firm about this. And I just started yelling at him. I was a teenager. And I said, "I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'll feel pain." I did not want to go back. But this time, bam, we were right above my body. I'm with Jesus right above my body. I'm laying there on my left side. I can see myself laying on my left side. And I see the ranch owner, Charlie, crying and praying. He's kneeling down by my body. My sisters are crying. My horse is standing there because Charlie had jumped on my horse and ridden her out of the barn to look for me when she went running into the barn, and he realized I wasn't on her back. Everything was quiet. Everything was just silent other than Charlie crying and praying and my sisters crying. My horse was just standing there. And I'm looking at my body thinking, how am I supposed to get into this body? I did not want to get back in that body. And Jesus shoved me in from the back. He just shoved me in. It's like, and I hit the inside of my skull. Whatever spiritual body I had, which was an actual body, I hit the inside of my skull and I panicked. I was so claustrophobic in my body. I did not want to be there. I didn't know how to be one with my body. I didn't know how anything worked. I was struggling inside my body, but my body didn't move. And suddenly Jesus was in my body with me. And he meshed me together. He made me one person again. He put my spiritual body back into my physical body. And he said a few things. I mean, he said a lot of things while we were traveling, which he's actually a really hilarious guy. But he said to me, "Your life is in good hands." And I didn't get that initially. I said, "Well, what is everyone else? Chopped liver? Isn't their life in good hands?" And I realized what he was talking about was faith, that no matter what happens, good, bad, indifferent, my life is in good hands. I was in his hands. And when he left me with his presence, which was, I learned later, because I knew nothing about the Trinity. My father said the Trinity is like paganism or something, idolatry. I didn't really have a comprehension of that. I didn't have an understanding of that, but he left me with his presence, which is the Holy Spirit. And then I managed to open an eye. It took me a long time to remember how to use my body, how to even speak. I managed to open one eye, and I just croaked out Charlie's name, and he said, thank God. And he threw me over my horse, which was not the right thing to do, but he was panicked. He was absolutely panicked. And he rode me down to the car, threw me in the back of the car, drove me home. And because my parents were just a little bit odd, they left me unable to move. I was quite severely injured. They left me in bed for until the next morning, unable to move my legs, unable to move from the waist down. And I had a lot of broken stuff. So it wasn't till the next morning when my mother had taken my sisters to school and she realized I hadn't been able to move. And she had left me. She drove Charlie back out to his ranch after he brought me home. And I told my youngest sister, with whom I shared a room, she kind of left her in charge of me. I told her what had happened. I told her everything that had happened, and she believed me. She'd seen me dead. She believed me. But I wasn't able to really talk much after that. And the next day, my mother, it was extremely difficult. My mother drove me to a clinic. I had to actually get down a flight of stairs and down the porch steps and out to the car, dragging myself by my arms because I couldn't move my legs. That was not easy. And my mother drove me to a clinic, and they did bring a gurney out. And the doctor just said to her, "Mother, she's going straight to the hospital." And he said to me, "You will not move for a month." And I didn't have very good care at this particular hospital. There was another hospital in town. I probably should have been sent there. But this doctor, I didn't have a doctor. My pediatrician had died years before, and I didn't have a doctor. This doctor was actually our neighbor and my grandmother's doctor. So I was left flat on my back for a month in the hospital, and my recovery was very difficult because I didn't receive the proper care. And I'm a nurse, so I do know what kind of care is required under these circumstances, but I did heal. And I attribute that to God. I do attribute that to God. Without any intervention, human intervention, without physical therapy, without proper medical care, I managed to regain the ability to walk. And yes, I do have some lingering back pain. I've had it my entire life, or I've had it since then. But yeah, I'm okay. And when I was in the hospital, I knew what had happened to me, and it changed me in an instant. That meeting Jesus, the minute I opened my eyes, I knew I was a different person. My parents didn't come to visit me till the next night, and I immediately told them what had happened and that I'd met Jesus. My father just turned around and walked out of the room. My mother said, "Oh, honey, when we're sick or injured, we imagine a lot of things." I said I didn't imagine anything. And I told her again what happened. My parents sent a psychiatrist to speak with me. They sent a different rabbi who we had joined another synagogue by this time. And he came to see me, and I told them both the same thing, and both of them didn't want to discuss it. So it wasn't something I was allowed to discuss in my house, but it changed me overnight. No more drugs, no more crazy behavior, no more darkness. Whatever my parents were doing or weren't doing was immaterial to me. I had a plan, and that plan involved Jesus, and I just got on with my life. I ended up graduating from high school a year early, going to Israel and living there for a year because, first of all, I'm very attached to Israel. My grandmother was very attached to Israel. And I felt like I'm not going to see Jesus in this life. I want to be as close to him as I can be. So I spent a year in Israel in the Galilee. I stayed on a kibbutz in the Galilee, learned Hebrew. I already knew some Hebrew, but became fluent in Hebrew and traveled all over Israel, Jerusalem. Spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, was on the West Bank, all over the northern Galilee, all over around the Sea of Galilee, all through the Negev. Even in the Sinai, because at that time Israel still had the Sinai, and it was amazing. I stayed for a little over a year, and I probably wouldn't have gone home, but I was feeling guilty. I knew my parents wanted me to come home, and I was feeling a little guilty about it. And my overriding thing was, I miss Mexican food. I missed Mexican food so bad. You know, falafel's great. I love falafel. It's not the same as Mexican food. I came home because I missed Mexican food so much. So I ended up coming home, and life was not easy after that. You know, life with my family, life in general was always one step forward, two steps back. But from that moment on, Jesus was with me. When I went to college, I majored in creative writing with a minor in religious studies, specifically Judaic studies, biblical Hebrew, and first century Judaism / Christianity. I ended up going back to college later and to become a nurse because I couldn't get a job as an English major. There weren't jobs that would pay well. And I ended up becoming a registered nurse, which I've been ever since. Worked coronary care, intensive care, and I ended my career. I'm retired now. I was a hospice nurse for a lot of years because death doesn't scare me. So I was a really good hospice nurse. And hospice is difficult, but very rewarding, very beautiful. And, you know, in the end, and having a relationship, maintaining a relationship with my parents was challenging all those years. My father died in June of 2022 at the age of 94. My mother died in January of 2023 at the age of 91, just short of her 91st birthday. And both of them came to God in the end. My dad, in the last hour of his life, which was amazing and miraculous, and I attribute that to the prayers of so many people. So many people were praying for my dad. My mom had oftentimes, she had dementia, but that's not what killed her. She died of pulmonary emboli in her lungs, blood clots in her lungs. My mom had never been allowed to ask me about my near-death experience while my dad was alive, but she did get dementia. And once she got dementia, she forgot she wasn't supposed to ask me about it again. So she would always ask me about it. And my mom, I was so fortunate because 24 hours before she died, I had my mom back. All of her memories were restored. This was my mother. And we were able to talk about everything. She died, she and my dad struggled until the last hour before his death, struggled terribly, but he died a very peaceful death. My mother she died the most peaceful death I've ever seen. And I've seen so much death. She had actually, because of the pulmonary emboli, died, had a near-death experience in the hospital, and then come back. And then I had her back for 24 hours, completely lucid, completely intact. Then she slipped into a coma for 10 days, and she slept like this. Every once in a while, she'd reach up to scratch her nose, sleep like this, and she died after she died 10 days later. So it's been an interesting life.
Before we get back to the interview, don't miss Freebie Friday. Every Friday, a brand new faith-building ebook, audiobook, or video course is released completely free for 1 week from Friday to Friday. After that, it's gone. So go see what's free this week at godsvoiceday.com/free. And now let's get back to the interview. Wow. You know, Heidi, the whole time I was thinking about your father, just your parents. You mentioned that they struggle with depression and anxiety. Can you imagine being in the situation that they were in, their daughter coming home telling them that you met Jesus?
I met Jesus.
And so if you're already anxious about the afterlife or lack of one, being an atheist, now you have that to deal with going forward. And it's your daughter.
It's your daughter, and you're Jewish, and you can be a Buddhist Jew, you can be an atheist Jew. None of that matters. Jesus is the barrier you don't cross. You don't step across that line. Jesus is the one thing you don't do. Taboo.
Well, I would have loved to be like a fly on the wall when you were talking to the rabbis and them having to hear such detailed explanation of what you did on the other side.
Yeah,
and
that was...
Like, what do you say to that?
This particular rabbi was not religious. He was from a Reform temple, and he was well known for his political activism and his atheism. My father really admired him. I found it kind of a contradiction in terms to be a rabbi and be an atheist, but that's what he was. And there are so many Jews I know who are atheists. You're Jewish. It's your ethnic identity, and you celebrate the festivals, you eat the foods, but you don't believe in God. So when I talked to him, he patted me on the shoulder. I told him everything that happened. He patted me on the shoulder and he said, "You had a hallucination." I said, "No, I didn't. This is the most real thing that's ever happened to me. I died. I met Jesus. I met God the Father." And he just looked at me and he left. It was like my dad. He left. He had no answer for that. And he couldn't cope with it. Now, the really interesting thing is a nurse had overheard portions of our conversation. So she came in and asked me about what had happened. And I told her, and I guess she told the hospital chaplain, the hospital priest, because he came in the next day and wanted to hear everything. And he would come and visit me every day after that and just say, "Please tell me what Jesus looked like. Tell me what he said." He just wanted to sit there. He'd sit there for an hour and we'd just chat. And I didn't have a lot of visitors when I was there. I was there for a long time. So he was my consistent visitor. But he wanted to hear the story over and over again. And it's a pretty amazing. It's amazing. It's miraculous. And as I say, a lot of people think, well, you're Jewish, you didn't believe in Jesus, why would you see him? And my answer is, he's the God of all. He's the God of all people. And who needs him more than me? Who needs him more than somebody who doesn't believe in him? If you believe in him, it's like he said, if you're already righteous, you don't need, he said something like, he was healing. He said, if you're healthy, you don't need a doctor. I've come to heal the sick. Well, I needed healing, and he did that. And I understood redemption. I understood, I got all those concepts that were very foreign to me. The need for salvation, the need for redemption. This was all new stuff. And I didn't have context because I'd barely read my own scriptures, let alone the New Testament. So it wasn't till I was in Israel that I actually read the New Testament and then which kind of pointed me back to my own scriptures, and then began reading my own scriptures. Because you don't have context for this coming from my background. So, I mean,
I'm still thinking about that, Rabbi. Can you imagine? So he like walks away. This is happened to a Jewish girl, Jewish family. He hears this. He walks away. You're almost like, I wish, like, what happened to that rabbi? Like, I wonder I'm sure, how can you walk away from something like that and not think about it? Surely it probably like haunted him for the rest of his life.
No, and I don't think so.
Who knows? Maybe I won't.
I don't think so. I think he convinced himself this was a hallucination. First of all, I'm not in his brain. I'm not in his heart. I'm not in his soul. Right. So at the end of his life, I don't know what happened. Mm-hmm. But I would say, as long as I was aware of him, as long as I knew him before he retired, we never had another conversation about this. It was kind of like my dad. It was taboo. You didn't talk about it. It was the one thing. Now, I could talk about it with my father's mother, my grandmother. She was the one who told me Jesus was Jewish. I didn't know. I thought he was a pagan god, an idol. She told me he was Jewish. And from time to time, she would have missionaries at her house, Christian missionaries. And my father would say, why do you have those people there? She said, they're nice people. And I would be there and have lunch with them or tea with them or coffee with them. So she had a different perspective and a different understanding than my father did. But
interesting.
Yeah.
What about your sisters? I'm curious. So they heard the same testimony, your experience. Today, are they followers of Jesus?
No, my middle sister is much more Orthodox Jewish. But she has always listened to my story, and she has read about Jesus. She studied about him. She's very open to my story, to what I have to say. My youngest sister heard my story from the very beginning. She believed me. She's also Jewish. She's not, I actually don't know. We don't discuss it. So I don't know how religious or non-religious she is. I don't know. It's just not something we've talked about. But I know she considers herself Jewish. I consider myself Jewish. I consider myself a born-again Jew. I mean, I really kind of straddled this fence for a while. Am I Christian? Am I Jewish? I'm both. I'm an amalgam. I love being Jewish. I am a Jewish follower of Jesus. He is my Messiah. He's the world's Messiah. I am a Jewish follower of Jesus. And I'm happy that way.
No, that's awesome. And I was thinking of your career as a nurse and hospice, right? I think you said you were
in hospice. Yeah.
And being that person who had the honor to help people transition in eternity, and you were well qualified. My goodness, you've been to the other side, so you know exactly where they're transitioning. So it's like almost like the airport to either heaven or hell. And it's interesting. I worked in the hospital in college. I passed trades in the hospital. And in fact, that's where I really was intrigued with these near-death experiences, because some of the patients told me about theirs. Vladimir, I died on the operating table. Yeah. And so I'm curious, you working in hospice, did you hear a lot of those stories?
I was with everyone. Some people were already unconscious by the time I took care of them. Some people actually woke up and told me what they had seen. Some people I was with during the dying process, and they were talking throughout the dying process, and I knew what they were seeing. They were seeing Jesus. They were seeing loved ones, especially military people, former military. They would tell me, because there was one particular assisted living place that was only available to former Air Force, retired Air Force people. And they would always see, and this was a lot of the World War II generation dying off. And they would see the members, the people who had been in there playing with them, the people in their squadron, their best friends from the military were usually the first people to show up and welcome them. And I got to hear a lot of that. It was sometimes very sad because, yes, I know it's hard for me to, even as a nurse, even knowing what I know with children, young people, young parents, when they pass away, when they die, that's so hard for me. It's so hard for everyone. You don't want to lose those people. But I know where they're going, but it doesn't make it any less painful. But yes, a lot of my patients were able to tell me the really beautiful visions they had. And in fact, one woman named Mary, she'd been in a coma for 2 weeks, and I went to see her. Everyone was expecting her to die any day. And she woke up from her coma, talked about heaven, talked about God, talked about all her dead relatives, and she had been blind from birth. But she was able to describe everything in heaven exactly like you or I, anyone who's not blind, would describe it. She was awake and singing and laughing and joking for probably 16 hours, and then she died. It was a miracle. It was amazing. So, and she was one of the funniest people I've ever met. Well, other than Jesus, who's really funny and likes to laugh. But yeah.
Well, that's interesting you say that Jesus was very funny and likes to laugh, because I grew up in a very traditional, everything was the devil, right? And in fact, the humor was looked at as weakness, like it's not from God.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were always serious 24/7. And it's interesting that you say that Jesus was very funny, because if you think about it, where do you think humor comes from, right?
Yeah, he's all joy. He has so much joy. Somebody asked me recently if I could describe God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit in just one word each. I would say, this was a no-brainer. I knew exactly how I would describe them. God is love, Jesus is joy, and the Holy Spirit is wisdom or discernment. And I got that immediately when I was dead. There's so much joy that radiates from his eyes, from his face, that you can't look away. And you can look at Jesus' face. You can't look at God's face. But Jesus is accessible. He's available. We can look at him. He's God putting on skin and walking through life with us.
I love that. God is love, Jesus is joy, and Holy Spirit is wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you said that you can see, Jesus' face is kind of like the reflection. But it's interesting, when you were sitting on God's lap, you couldn't see his face. And it's interesting, a lot of people say that. Why do you think that is so?
I think God is greater and more mysterious than we can imagine. And I think even when you're dead, he's beyond our comprehension. So he's just, the only way I can describe it is he's bigger than you can even imagine. I don't know why I couldn't see his face. I know in the Hebrew scriptures, Moses saw God face to face, as it says. He talked to him mouth to mouth. And Moses' face frightened the Israelites because he shone with the light of God after he had spoken with God face to face. I just think humans aren't supposed to see God's face. I don't understand that. It didn't bother me when I was dead. I just accepted it. But
another thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, another thing, you were talking about the veil. You said that you almost saw the people on the other side of the veil. I'm curious if if you crossed over to the other side of the veil, I guess it would be like almost no return back, right? Were you aware of that?
Yeah, that was my sense, that if I would have met those people, if I would have gone over there, then I would have been dead. No, there would have been no return. And I kind of, to be honest with you, I had several months before my accident, I was in such a dark place that I had prayed for death. I had prayed for death. And I got the feeling that this was the answer to my prayers, that Jesus had other plans for me. Jesus and God, who are still one and the same, had other plans for me. But I got that taste. I got that experience. And it changed the course of my life. Because I would not have survived my teenage years. Had I not died at 16, I would not have survived to 20. I would have been dead.
Wow.
And it wouldn't have been a good death. So this was an opportunity. It was a gift. It was a miracle. And I'm forever grateful. I know some people, I don't really follow a lot of NDEs. I do through John Burke. I'm very close with John Burke. And I know some people have said when they come back here, this life looks so, unpleasant to them and they're depressed. Or I came back loving this life I came back with a whole new attitude. I love this life. I love this life. I love my kids. I love the mountains. I love the ocean. I love animals. I came back loving this life even more and seeing what a gift it is. This is where we meet God. This is where we learn through experience. We suffer. We hopefully grow. We feel joy. We feel pain. But this life is intended to bring us closer to God and people and His creation. It's like Paul, what did Paul talk about? Natural faith or something, that if you look at nature, how can you not believe in God? And I always had that sense anyway. If you look up at the stars at night, how can you not believe in God? But
it's interesting you say that, Heidi, because I was just recently talking so every day I take about 4 to 6, sometimes more phone calls from people just randomly call that can schedule 15-minute conversation. And 90% of those phone calls, people share their supernatural encounters. And then some of them I invite on the show. But this one lady who was a lesbian, and she said she was pretty much an atheist, right? She said that. And I told her, like, what held you over? Like, why were you agnostic but not fully on the other side? And she said, just exactly what you said. She said, when I look around nature, it's just I had a hard time believing that everything had so much purpose and meaning and everything's cyclical, and it's like I just couldn't write him off 100%. He said, I was pretty close. I was almost there. But not 100%. That's interesting that you say that. Yeah, you see God in nature.
Yeah, I see God in nature. I see God in people. You can see bad things in people too. If you live in this world, you're going to encounter or read about or hear about a lot of bad stuff. And sometimes, as a hospice nurse, I know that there are times when the very best people you can imagine die. People who you don't, they're such good people. But death comes to all of us. It might come when we're children. It might come when we're a young mother. It might come when we're 50. It might come when we're 110. But there is no escape. There is no escape from that at this yet. God will fix that. But, we all come to the same end. And we share that. It's part of our humanity. It's part of, death is if you're in my father's shoes, if you put yourself in my father's head, death is the ultimate enemy. It is the ultimate fear. And what did Jesus do? He conquered that enemy. And that, if nothing else, gives us hope. That he conquered death. Death is the ultimate. That's basically what we all fear. We don't fear sudden.
It's interesting you say that because I have a good friend. I haven't stayed in touch with him over many years, but that's the one thing. He was an atheist, 100% atheist, but he told me all the time how much he feared dying. It's like almost like he knew that there's something, like what if there's something on the other side? He had that in the back of his mind. But it's interesting that at age 16, right, you prayed for death. Why? What was happening during that time in your life?
The abuse I experienced was so severe and so traumatic, and I was trapped in a really horrible situation that I prayed for God to kill me because I didn't see any way out. I did not see another way out. I prayed for death. And God kept me alive that night, the night I prayed for death. But after that, I wasn't really living. I was just floating through my existence. I didn't want to be here. I didn't care about anything. I mean, I still cared about my sisters. I still cared about some people. I cared about my horse, but I didn't care about me. I didn't care whether I lived or died. Didn't matter. In fact, I probably would have preferred to die. But yes, I had prayed for death and God answered my prayer that night. And then it's not something I recommend. I don't recommend praying for death. It just so happens that I believe my accident was, in a way, the answer to my prayer, and it set my life on an entirely different course. It saved my life. That accident, that death, that near-death experience saved my life.
Wow. There's something else you mentioned about how it's just about God was talking about, or Jesus was talking about how to treat my creation. I forget exactly what you said, the exact words, but when you said that, I remember thinking how poorly we treat his creation. I always...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, he doesn't expect perfection, and I knew that. I'm never going to be perfect. None of us, he's perfect. We're not perfect. But it was like he said, be good. Do the best you can. And, think about it. Ask for forgiveness. If you wrong someone, even if you don't like them, even if you feel justified, you can still ask for forgiveness. And you can forgive others. It's like the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those in debt to us. If he can forgive me, I can forgive them. And sometimes, it's really hard. Sometimes it's really hard. And, my father and I struggled a lot. In the end, there was forgiveness. There was God there in that room where he died. And there was forgiveness between us. Because I'd forgiven him and forgiven him and forgiven him, and it was always right back to where we started. But this time, there was just plain old forgiveness. My mother and I didn't have that same problem, but even someone who does you wrong, you don't, or even someone who's not the nicest person, it's not like you have to be best friends with them, but you can still forgive them the wrong they did you and go on. It's kind of like turning the other cheek. I forgive you, and now I'm going to go on with my life and not think about it. I'm not going to worry about it. That's kind of what I got. That I don't want to carry anger, bitterness, hatred. I don't want to carry that with me. That's
forgiveness sets you free, right?
Yeah.
When you forgive, you actually, that person probably who wronged you probably doesn't even think about you, right?
Right.
But you carry that unforgiveness, and when you let it go, it's like a ton of weight just lifts off your shoulders.
Yeah.
It's easier to live that way.
And it's sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it comes back, but then you just do it again. Just do it again. So, and if you can't forgive, there have been times when I've said, God, this is really hard for me. So I'm going to leave it in your hands, and you'll take care of it when the time is right. It will all work out. I actually have a tremendous amount of faith and trust in God. I do. It's kind of like we have free will in this world, because love compelled or love coerced is not love. God wants us to choose him. He doesn't want to scare us and say, if you don't love me, this is going to happen to you. We may be aware of that, but we choose God of our own free will. He does not make us love him. He does not make us. Jesus never once said, you will love me or else. Never said that. I just knew the minute I saw him that I loved him. I loved him. And I knew that I was able to see in my life review that all of those times when I had been talking to God when I was a little kid and had this sense he was at my bedside, that it was Jesus. I saw him sitting there. I even saw him with me when I was an infant. So he had been with me. He formed me in my mother's womb. I saw that in my life review. How can you not be grateful for this person who's person and God, total human, total God, who gives you life? How can you not be grateful for that? It's amazing. And I mean, he really is that. He's like so human. He is the most human being in the universe. He is the most humble human being in the universe. He's the funniest human being in the universe. He's the most joyous. He's the most gracious. He's the most forgiving human being in the universe. And it just takes one, I'm sorry or forgive me or, humble yourself and he's right there. He's so human. I wish I could explain. He's everything that's perfect about a human and he's that. So.
Speaking of Jesus,
yes.
When you went to Israel, the whole time when you said you went to Israel, I'm like, I bet that was cool. Like,
it was great.
Knowing what you know and then living there, learning Hebrew and reading the scriptures in Hebrew. What was that experience like, just being in the same place where he walked the earth?
Israel, when I was there, was less developed. It was very agricultural. It still is. It's still really agricultural in the north and Galilee. But when you're walking, you are walking on the bones of history. That's how I felt. I'm walking on the bones of my Jewish history. I'm walking on the bones of my early Christian history. You're at the time, and it's a little bit less so now, but because I was back there not too long ago, but you're walking around kicking pottery shards from the first century. You're kicking pottery shards that are older. You're just picking up stuff randomly. My kibbutz was at the foot of Mount Gilboa, where Saul and Jonathan were killed by the Philistines. I used to hike there all the time, and I'd find all kinds of pottery and spear points, and even a ram's horn, a really degraded ram's horn. I brought a lot of stuff back with me. In fact, I emptied out my duffel bag of clothing to bring everything home with me that I found. And I have a lot of pottery that I found there. I felt so close to God, and in fact, back then, nobody really watched. I was in the Garden of Gethsemane. I went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and I spent the night there leaning against an olive tree. Nobody told me I couldn't. I really got it when I was there, because in the middle of the night, it hit me. Remember, I'm 17 years old, but it hit me. Christianity would have been stillborn without the resurrection. That's it. The resurrection was everything. Had he not walked out of that grave, there would have been no Jewish followers, no disciples that spread the word. There would have been none of what became Christianity. And it just really hit me. It also hit me that nobody dies for a lie. If you knew you were going to be crucified or tortured or stoned to death, would you keep saying you saw him that he was resurrected? I wouldn't if I had lied about it. Nobody dies for a lie. Nobody's that stupid. And it wasn't a mass hallucination. They didn't lie about it. You don't say these things unless they're true. And it just was overwhelming to me to feel that. So I would say that in Israel, especially in Jerusalem, I had never felt more physically close to God in this life. I felt really, it was a very holy place, and I felt very close to God. The entire year, which was a lot of fun, and I also got over my eating disorder. I didn't have to. My parents had micromanaged everything to the point where the only thing I could control was what I did or did not put in my mouth. So I developed an eating disorder. Even that lingered even after my near-death experience. When I went to Israel, I was free. I had freedom, make my own decisions, do what I felt was right. do what I felt God was calling me to do. And the eating disorder was gone. That was gone. So it's kind of like the fear of death was gone the moment I died and met Jesus. And the eating disorder was gone in Israel because I had no need to, I didn't have somebody micromanaging everything I did and said and wore. And it was just really, it was freedom. And the truth is, even when you don't have that physical freedom, Jesus in your heart gives you that inner freedom. But it's also been a process because it took me years of study and worship and prayer. And I did get baptized, which I kind of wish I would have gotten baptized in Israel. I thought about it in the Jordan River. I really thought about it, but I didn't go over there and do it. I was baptized here, but it's taken me a while to find a home in a church that meets my needs, that respects Scripture the way I respect Scripture, and that loves God the way I love God. It's taken me a while. I kind of avoided churches and synagogues for a long time. But I feel really at home now. I feel comfortable in an Orthodox synagogue because those traditions are so familiar to me. That's home. That's from my childhood. I love it. I love those old traditions. But I feel comfortable in a church as well. So it's a process for me, and it's a process that's probably going to last throughout my entire life.
Wow. And curious, since that experience, so you had that near-death experience at 16, have you had any supernatural experiences since then?
Yes. I've had visions. I've seen Jesus again in visions. There's a difference between a dream and a vision, or I always know the difference. And there was another point in my life where things were not going well, just because I came back from Israel and found myself back I was in college, and then there came a time when I needed to leave college and go help my mother. She was overwhelmed by a number of things, and I found myself again, I call it my black hole of Calcutta year, again in a very dark place, taking on so much responsibility and dealing with all the dysfunction in the family. And I found myself in a very dark place, ended up making some very bad decisions again. And it was Jesus who I saw again who got me out of it. It's kind of a complicated story, so I really can't get into the details, but this was Jesus saying, you've gone back. You've circled back to where another bad, it wasn't drugs or anything like that, but he's like, you've circled back into the bad old girl. Get out, move forward. And I did. And that was the last. And so I saw him then and physically saw him. And then I've had some dreams and visions since then. And there were a couple of things that when I came back after being dead, when you're dead, everything makes sense. And I knew that. I had no more questions. None of these existential questions we all have in this life. Why are we here? Is there a God? What happens after death? Blah, blah, blah. What is the nature of good and evil? All of those were answered. Immediately, I knew those were answered, and I knew the answers. The minute I woke up, the minute I opened my eyes, the only thing I could remember was that I'd known the answers when I was dead, but I couldn't remember the answers anymore, which kind of made sense to me. I mean, if we have all the answers in this life, why would we want to learn in this life if we already had the answers? That's not the point. But there are some things from occasionally Jesus reveals a little bit more of what he showed me. He showed me a lot of things when I was dead. In fact, the entire time we were traveling, he was talking to me. Well, we were laughing and joking, but he was talking to me. He was instructing me. And a lot of that I had vague memories of, and they become, as I've gotten older, they become more clear and sort of more integrated into me. And it wasn't anything magical or supernatural. It was just, he told me certain things. You know, he showed me certain things that I had vague memories of, but I couldn't quite place in, you know, where he showed what was happening, where he showed me these things. So, and even to this day, I know he showed me these things, but I don't know where in the time I was with him, he showed me. But there's no timeline there. When you're dead, there's no time. I mean, what I thought was when I was dead was either after death, there is no time, or we have all the time in the world. Time was very different because I was maybe dead for 4 to 5 minutes. I had eternity when I was dead. There was no chronological time like we experience it here. It was very different.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, when you were with Jesus, when you guys were communicating to each other, was it kind of like thought to thought, or did you see his lips move? Because for example, when I had the face-to-face encounter, we spoke almost like telepathy-like.
It's both.
But I'm curious what it was.
It was both. I actually remember blah, 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 blah. I remember talking to him, but it was both because sometimes it was just, we were thinking thought to thought. And sometimes it was aloud. We were chatting aloud. We were chatting. He's so outgoing and so funny. And I remember chatting with him. So I don't know, because the chat was conversation. It was a back and forth. So it might have been that I just thought my lips were moving, but I just know we were having a back and forth conversation, whether it was us talking. And I do remember both of us talking together, or it was both at the same time. That's honestly, he was reading my heart and he allowed me to read what was in his heart, was essentially the way it worked. So, I mean, he knows everything about us. There's just nothing. Right. There's nothing you're going to keep a secret after you die. Don't think you can keep any secrets. He knows it all. He knows it all.
But Heidi, I can't help but think of your father. Can you imagine like his first moments in heaven, seeing Jesus?
I think he was surprised, but I think he saw Jesus. I think he saw Jesus just before he died, because the fact is, less than an hour before he died, and I was praying with my dad. Had my hand. He could still squeeze my hand. We were praying. I was praying. He was squeezing my hand. He did something I've never seen a dying patient do. This is really unusual. He was kind of in bed with his head elevated, and he lifted his legs and he kicked. He kicked at something vile, like he was kicking a serpent, a poisonous serpent, away from him. And all I could think of was, holy smokes, he just kicked Satan out of his body. That's the only image that came to my mind. And after he had done that, he was able to completely relax and he was at peace. So, wow. And everything changed. His breathing became peaceful. His heart stopped its pounding, which was horrible. The peace came over. It was shalom descended on him. Peace came over his face, and he let go of my hand, and he just relaxed. And he was probably dead within 30 minutes, 40 minutes. But his death was so peaceful. Here my father had struggled his whole life. He had fought against death his whole life. He had run from death his whole life. He couldn't live his life because he was so busy running from death. And suddenly, the last, hour of his life, he found peace. It was beautiful. It was truly beautiful. So when I put my mother to bed and came back out, and I knew when I came back out of the bedroom, he would be dead. And I was so sad and so happy for him. And I thought, the sad thing was he had suffered his whole life. We had both suffered in our relationship. We had suffered his entire life. What a waste. But in the end, he was able to move forward. And I got the sense, because of what I experienced with Jesus, I got the sense that it's not like Jesus said, it's all cool. It's all good. Let's just get going here. He does. But I think I got the feeling that Jesus and my dad had to have a really serious heart to heart. I honestly got that feeling that they were having a very serious heart to heart conversation, before my dad could move forward. But I know, the interesting thing about my dad is we found out that in the weeks before he died, he was confiding in his caregiver who was Christian, who was the pastor of her women's group. And he had been asking her to pray for him in Jesus' name. And he'd been praying with her. But we didn't know that at the time. And then another friend of his was a pastor, and he had 2 different prison ministries. So he had been praying with my dad and for my dad, and everyone in his prison ministries was praying for my dad. We didn't know that this was going on. My dad kept this a secret. He didn't want anybody to know he needed Jesus. He didn't want anyone to know. So it's quite interesting.
It's not how you start your race, it's how you finish it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's how you finish the race. Yep, finish strong. Yeah.
Wow. Speaking of finishing, before we wrap up this interview, I'd love for you to talk more about your book. I know we can only cover so much from your experience. Tell me more about the book. What led you to write it?
It was hard. I wanted to write this book for a while, but I kept thinking, this is really going to be the last straw. My father's not going to speak with me again. My mother won't speak with me again. If I put this book out there, my cousins I'm going to lose everyone in my family. I'm going to lose any connection to the Jewish community. I really struggled with it. And then I met John Burke in 2018. And I had already been thinking from maybe I'd already been thinking for several years. I've been feeling this urge, write this book. And I kept saying, God, I can't write it yet. God, I can't write it yet. And then John Burke kept saying, write the book, write it. Let the chips fall where they may. So I did start writing it. And the ironic thing is I started writing it on the day my father went on hospice. I finished it a month after my mother died. It was very ironic. But it's called What I Saw in Heaven, and then there's a subtitle. Sorry, I can't remember. And I didn't bring the book up with me. But it details my early life, the struggles I went through, the darkest moment in my life, and then my near-death experience, and the immediate, what happened immediately after that. I don't talk too much about my hospitalization. That was not pleasant. But I'm actually working on a second book because I kind of leave out all my adult years, what happened after, and there's a big gap. And I go from my very young adulthood to my parents' death in that book. So it's What I Saw in Heaven, Heidi Barr, and it's on Amazon. It's everywhere. You can get it. It's with Baker Books. And I just felt like what this world really needs, look at everything that happens in this world. And it's hard for me because I'm trying to reach Jewish people too. And it's really hard. Being a Jewish person, I know how hard it is to reach Jewish people. But I made a decision, and God really pushed me to write this book. It's a testimony. It's how I met Jesus and how he's not just there for the people who already believe in him. He's there for every single person who is willing to turn to him. He's there for every single person. And believe me, he doesn't want to lose anyone. He doesn't want to lose anyone. We are all his children. So I felt like I just need to tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. And it's actually worked out. I'm not ostracized by family members.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's worked out okay. It was hard for me. It was hard because I want to honor my father and mother, but I had to be honest about certain things because it is those events in my early life that made the change Jesus wrought in my life all the more significant. As I said, I was headed down a very dark path. I would not have survived, and who knows where I would have ended up. Jesus changed everything. And I guess what I want is for people to understand that you can be hopeless. I was hopeless. And I came away, I woke up as injured as I was. I had hope. I had hope. I had faith. I had redemption. I had forgiveness. I had all those things. So even in the darkest times, he's there with us. Especially in the darkest times, he's there with us. And I wanted to get that out there. So people, I know how alone my dad felt. I know how alone my dad felt in this life without God. I don't want anyone to suffer the way he suffered if they can help it.
And you know, Heidi, I worked for Sid Roth for a couple of years, and I didn't know how hard it is for a Jewish person to come out, like say, follower of Jesus, who became, new convert. I guess not a convert, new follower of Jesus, to admit that to the family, to speak openly.
Oh yeah,
a lot of consequences for openly speaking about Jesus. And so during my time there, I gained a whole different appreciation for Jewish people speaking boldly about Jesus, especially you writing the book. And I'm sure, like you were saying, you were hoping that you wouldn't be cut off from your family. But I'm glad everything worked out. But it is a risk for a Jewish person that you knew that it's likely that you will probably never speak to your family ever again, right?
Yeah, I love them. I didn't want to lose them, but yeah, it's a risk you take. And if you're Orthodox and you profess faith in Jesus, they can declare you dead and say mourner's Kaddish because you're an apostate. You've left. You've actually. It's not a good thing. It's really difficult. Like I said, you can be a Jewish Buddhist, you can be a Jewish atheist, you can be a Jewish anything.
Not follower of Jesus.
That's the big hurdle. That's the last
Huge
step.
Hurdle.
Yeah.
Well, Heidi, I applaud you for taking that step, for taking that risk. I believe a lot of people already blessed by your testimony, but it's going to touch so many more people's lives.
Well,
Well, in closing, Heidi, before we wrap it up, I would love for you to tell everyone how can everyone get in touch with you if they have any questions.
Oh, wow. I have a website. First of all, you can always look on my Amazon author page, Heidi Barr. And if you click on the book, just click on my name and it'll go to my Amazon author page. And it's linked to a website. I have a static website. I don't really do anything with it. It just has the book and my picture and a link to the book. But it does have, it's called, and this is not a business visit. It was the only app or the only name I could get was newheaven.biz, B-I-Z. Not a business. I'm not selling anything, but that was the only name available that had heaven in it. So there is a place where you can sign up with an email, and then you can ask me any questions. I will answer to the best of my ability. And if I ever start doing something a little more active with the website, yes, you'll get any new blog posts or anything like that. You'll get information. So yeah, newheaven.biz. Or just put in Heidi Barr or something. It's on Wix, W-I-X is the web host. I'm not good at building websites and I did this myself. So that's why it's static right now.
Oh, that's impressive. Wow.
Yeah.
You wear many hats. Well, for everyone watching, I will include all the description, like the contact information, everything in the description below. So make sure to check that. But Heidi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. And I look forward to sharing this testimony with everybody. It will bless a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel blessed just talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching this episode of God's Voice today. If you were impacted by this conversation, you do not want to miss what's next. In our next explosive episode, fraud investigator Pastor Mark Rice reveals how uncovering fake miracles led him to undeniable supernatural encounters that shattered his skepticism. From exposing deception to witnessing real deliverance, his story will challenge everything you thought you knew about the supernatural. Click the video on the screen right now to watch. or check the description below if you don't see it. Until next time, have a great rest of the day. And I look forward to serving you and getting to know you more inside of our free private community over at family.godsvoicetoday.com. Talk soon. Bye-bye.